I was the family glitch, the ghost in the machine of the Whitford dynasty. My parents, Sterling and Beatrice, didn't look at me with love. They looked at me with the weary frustration of a luxury car owner dealing with a persistent engine light. For 28 years, I was the slow one, the one who struggled to decode the alphabet while my sister, Julianna, was busy winning Latin decathons and securing a seat at Harvard Law. They treated my dyslexia like a moral failing. Every dinner at our Upper East Side townhouse was a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know the lines. The crystal chandeliers would hum, the silver would clink against fine china, and my father would recount Juliana's latest triumph with the fervor of a man announcing a military victory. "She's got the Whitford spark," he'd boom, his voice vibrating through the mahogany table. "Sharp as a razor. That's how you build an empire." And then his gaze would land on me. The light in his eyes would extinguish instantly, replaced with a cold, flat gray. "And, Elara, how was the tutoring session today?" He wouldn't even wait for the answer. He'd already be reaching for the wine, his disappointment filling the room like a physical weight. My mother, Beatrice, would just sigh, a soft, airy sound that cut deeper than a scream. "We've tried everything, Sterling. Some children simply aren't academic. We have to be realistic." I was 12. I believed them. I believed that I was broken. But while they were busy polishing Juliana's pedestal, they failed to notice something. Because I couldn't read the words on the page like everyone else, I started reading everything else. I read the tension in a room. I read the tiny, involuntary flinch in my father's jaw when a business deal was going south. I read the company's internal structures, not as sentences, but as flowcharts, as living, breathing systems of power and debt. The only person who saw this was my grandmother, Eleanor. She was the one who actually built Whitford Properties from a single dusty office in Brooklyn back in 1965. She was the steel in the family spine, a woman who had clawed her way through a man's world before my father was even out of diapers. Every Sunday, I'd take the train to her apartment on the Upper West Side. It smelled of old books and expensive jasmine. She didn't make me read textbooks. She'd spread out old architectural blueprints or complex partnership agreements and tell me stories. "Look at the bones, Elara," she'd whisper, her weathered hand resting on mine. "Most people get lost in the wallpaper. They focus on the pretty words and the fancy titles. But the power is in the structure. You see the structure, don't you?" I did. I saw it better than anyone. But to the rest of the world, I was just the girl who tripped over her own tongue during a presentation. By 2024, the Whitford empire was valued at $92 million. My father ran it like a king, but he was a king who had forgotten who built his throne. I was working there too, if you could call it that. My father had graciously given me a job as an administrative assistant. My salary was $42,000. My office was a cubicle next to the copy machine, tucked away in a corner where the light bulbs flickered. Meanwhile, Juliana had just joined as chief legal counsel. Her starting salary was $280,000, plus a signing bonus that could have paid my rent for 5 years. I spent my days fetching coffee for executives who didn't know my name and scanning documents they didn't think I could understand. But as the scanner's green light passed over those pages, I was absorbing every line. I was seeing the architectural flaws in my father's deals. I saw the way he was over-leveraging the Brooklyn holdings. I saw the quiet, steady drain of capital into projects that were nothing more than ego-boosting monuments to his own name. Then came the morning of April 15th. The email hit my inbox at 9:02 a.m. Subject, confidential, position restructuring. I didn't need a specialist to help me read that. My position was being eliminated, effective July 1st. No explanation, no meeting, just a cold digital execution. That evening, I stayed late. The office was a tomb of glass and steel. I was packing a few personal items into a cardboard box when I heard voices coming from my father's corner office. The walls were supposed to be soundproof, but my grandmother had once told me where the ventilation ducts overlapped. If you stood in just the right spot by the copy machine, you could hear everything. It's for the best, Beatrice. We're about to announce Julianna's succession at the plaza. It looks messy having Elara here. A CEO's sister working as a secretary, it invites questions we don't want to answer. What kind of questions? My mother's voice was hushed. Questions about her condition. It makes the bloodline look weak. Investors want to see brilliance, not a charity case. We'll give her a generous severance, send her off to a nice little boutique or something where she can't do any damage. A charity case, a weakness in the bloodline. I stood there, clutching a stapler, feeling my heart turn into a block of ice. They weren't just firing me from a job, they were purging me from the family. They were sanitizing their history to make room for Julianna's coronation. The next night was the graduation gala at the plaza. 350 of Manhattan's elite. The grand ballroom was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. The air tasted of expensive champagne and ego. I wore a black dress from a discount rack, feeling like a crow among peacocks. My mother intercepted me at the door, her eyes scanning me with instant disapproval. Table 27, Elara, near the kitchen. Try not to make a scene. Tonight is about your sister. Table 27. I wasn't even on the main floor. I was tucked away behind a massive marble pillar, hidden away like a shameful secret. I watched from the shadows as my father took the stage. He looked every bit the patriarch, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming with pride he had never once directed at me. "Tonight, we celebrate not just an academic achievement, but the future of Whitford Properties. My daughter, Julianna, has proven herself to be the true heir to this legacy." He beckoned her up. She floated onto the stage in an emerald Valentino gown that cost more than my annual salary. "Effective immediately," my father announced, his hand on her shoulder. "Julianna will be named CEO-elect. She will inherit my entire estate, including our Park Avenue residence and the controlling interest in the company. The Whitford legacy is safe in her hands." The room erupted, standing ovations, camera flashes. My parents were beaming, tears of joy in their eyes. At table 27, my distant cousins didn't even look at me. I was officially a ghost. I felt a stinging heat behind my eyes, a scream building in my throat that I knew I had to swallow. But then I felt a presence. A man in a sharp gray suit was standing beside my chair. He wasn't clapping. He looked around 60, with eyes that seemed to see through the marble pillar I was hiding behind. "Miss Whitford?" he asked. His voice was low, gravelly, and held more authority than my father ever did. "I'm Elara," I said, my voice trembling. "If you're looking for the heirs, they're on stage." "I'm not looking for them," he said. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax. "I was your grandmother, Eleanor's personal attorney. She gave me very specific instructions on when to deliver this to you." He looked at the stage where my father was hugging Julianna. "She told me to wait until the day your father showed you who he really was." He pressed the envelope into my hand. "I believe that day is today." My fingers brushed the red wax. I could feel the weight of the paper. It felt like lead. "What is this?" I whispered. "The truth, and the keys to the kingdom. I suggest you read it somewhere private. You have 72 hours to act, Elara. After that, the window closes forever." He turned and vanished into the crowd before I could ask another question. I clutched the envelope to my chest, my heart racing so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. I pushed through the service doors, ignoring the startled looks of the waiters, and found a quiet hallway near the kitchens. My hands were shaking so violently I almost couldn't break the seal. But when I did, and I pulled out the 3 pages of dense legal text, the world went silent. I read the first line, then the second. I didn't need a tutor. I didn't need audiobooks. The words didn't swim. They burned. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all previous testaments. I skipped down to the section marked Bequests. To my granddaughter, Elara Whitford, who has the eyes to see what others miss, I leave 51% of my voting shares in Whitford Properties. I do this because my son, Sterling, has proven himself a man of ego, not of vision. He's mistaken Elara's silence for weakness, just as he mistook my age for senility. I leaned against the cold tile wall, a sob breaking from my throat. 51%. The controlling interest, the entire empire. I am the majority shareholder, I stated, standing up. And under Section 14.3 of the 1965 Partnership Agreement, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Sterling Whitford as CEO. You can't do that, Julianna screamed. The transition period ended the moment Silas Thorne filed that will in probate this morning, I said. Right now, I own 51% of the air you're breathing in this room. The room was chaos. My father was shouting at Holloway. Susan Parker was arguing with the board secretary. Julianna was on her phone, likely calling every lawyer in her contact list. Enough. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, stood up. He was a man of few words, a titan of old-school real estate who had always been my father's most loyal ally. He looked at the will, then he looked at me. Elara, you realize what you're asking for. If we vote no confidence, your father is out, effective immediately. The company will be in flux. The company is already in flux, Robert, I said. It's just been headed toward a cliff. I'm asking you to let me hit the brakes. And what makes you think you can lead? My father sneered, a desperate last-ditch effort to humiliate me. You, the girl who needs a special computer to read an email, you're gonna run a $90 million empire? I felt the sting of it, the old shame trying to claw its way back up my throat. But then I remembered Grandma Eleanor's voice. You see things others miss. I'm not going to run it like you did, Sterling, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried further than his shout. I'm not going to run it on ego and lies. I'm going to run it on the truth. And the truth is, you're fired. Robert Hartley sighed and looked at the board. The motion has been made and seconded by Mrs. Coleman. All those in favor of a vote of no confidence in Sterling Whitford, raise your hands. I didn't look at my father. I looked at the hands. 1, 2, Margaret, Holloway, Parker. Then, slowly, Robert Hartley's hand went up. 7, 8, 9. It was a massacre. My father sat back in his chair as if he'd been punched in the gut. He looked at his friends, his partners, and saw nothing but the cold, hard reflection of his own failure. This meeting is adjourned, Robert Hartley said, his voice heavy. Sterling, you have 1 hour to vacate your office. Security will escort you. You're doing this? My father whispered, looking at the board. To me? No, Sterling, Margaret said, lighting a cigarette with a steady hand. We're doing this for the company. You should have been nicer to the girl who fetches your coffee. She was the only one actually working. The board filed out, some offering me silent nods of respect, others looking at me with a new, sharp kind of fear. I stayed in my seat. Julianna stood over me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you won? She hissed. We will tie this up in court for the next 10 years. You'll be bankrupt before you ever see a dime of that inheritance. I don't need the inheritance, Julianna, I said, picking up my Zara bag. I have the voting rights, and my first act as majority shareholder is to eliminate the position of chief legal counsel. Your severance package is in your inbox. Try not to let the door hit your Valentino on the way out. She let out a sound that was half sob, half growl, and stormed out. Then it was just me and my father. He didn't move. He just stared at the empty head of the table. "Why?" he finally asked. "After everything we did for you, the tutors, the schools." "You didn't do those things for me, Sterling," I said, standing up. "You did them for yourself, so you wouldn't have to be embarrassed by me. But you forgot one thing." I walked to the door and paused, my hand on the cool brass handle. I was never the one who was slow. I was just waiting for you to trip. I walked out of the boardroom and into the sunlight of the 42nd floor. The air felt different. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't a ghost. I was the architect. But as I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Don't get too comfortable, Elara. The swamp in New Jersey isn't the only thing Sterling was hiding. Check the 2019 legacy audit. S." The elevator doors closed, and the pit of my stomach dropped. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The adrenaline from the boardroom didn't fade. It soured. I stood in the lobby of Whitford Tower, watching my father and Julianna being escorted toward the revolving doors with two stone-faced security guards. Sterling walked with his shoulders hunched, his expensive suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big. Julianna was hysterical, screaming about lawsuits and blood betrayal until the glass doors muffled her voice into a pathetic hum. I should have felt triumphant. I should have been popping champagne in the corner office. But that text message, "Check the 2019 legacy audit," was a cold finger tracing my spine. I didn't go to the CEO's suite. I went back to my cubicle. I needed to be where the shadows were familiar. I pulled up the company's deep storage server. The legacy audit wasn't in the main financial folders. It wasn't in the tax archives. My father had buried it 4 layers deep in a folder labeled Charitable Donations Historical. It was the digital equivalent of hiding a body in a graveyard. I opened the file. My breath hitched. The audit wasn't about New Jersey. It wasn't about over-leveraged loans. It was about the foundation of Whitford Properties, the 1965 Brooklyn acquisitions. As I moved through the scanned handwritten ledgers from the 60s, the architectural truth of our family wealth began to crumble. My grandmother Eleanor had built the company, yes, but she hadn't built it alone. The audit revealed a silent partner, a man named Elias Thorne, the father of Silas Thorne, my lawyer. Elias hadn't just been a partner, he had been the primary financier, and according to a side letter dated November 1968, he had been promised 40% of the company's total equity in perpetuity. I did the math. If that letter was legally binding, my grandmother's 51%, the shares she'd left me, didn't actually exist. She'd bequeathed me a majority stake in a company that owed nearly half its soul to a ghost. But it got worse. My father had discovered this audit in 2019. Instead of settling the debt or informing the board, he used company funds, the charitable donations, to pay Silas Thorne's law firm a retainer of $2 million a year. It wasn't a retainer, it was hush money. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Silas Thorne didn't give you that will out of the goodness of his heart, Elara. He gave it to you because he needs a majority shareholder to sign off on the Thorne restitution. Look at the signature line on the last page of the will again." I tore the cream-colored envelope open. I flipped to the very last page of Grandma's will. There, in tiny, microscopic legalese, tucked under the notary stamp, was a clause I had missed in my late-night rush. "This bequest is subject to the satisfaction of all outstanding historical liabilities as outlined in the Thorne-Whitford Agreement of 1968. The blood drained from my face. Silas Thorne hadn't been my ally. He had been a predator. He had watched my father for years, bleeding him dry with the retainer. And then, when my father was no longer useful, he had handed me the keys to a kingdom he intended to foreclose on the moment I took the throne. I wasn't the victor. I was the bridge. "Looking for this?" I jumped, nearly knocking my monitor over. Silas Thorne was standing at the entrance of my cubicle. He wasn't wearing the mask of the helpful family lawyer anymore. His eyes were hard, calculating, and predatory. I saw you leave the boardroom, Silas said, stepping into my small space. I figured it wouldn't take you long to find the legacy file. You always were the one who noticed the things others missed. You used me, I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage that felt like liquid fire. You let me walk into that room and destroy my family just so I could clear the way for your claim? Silas shrugged, a slow, elegant movement. Your family destroyed themselves, Elara. Your father was a thief and a fool. He was paying me to hide the truth from the board. But I don't want a retainer anymore. I want my father's 40%. And since you now hold the voting rights, all I need is your signature on the Restitution Act, and we can both walk away very rich. And if I don't sign? Silas leaned in, his shadow falling over me. Then I take the legacy audit to the SEC. I show them 40 years of fraudulent filings. I show you your father's charitable hush money. The company will be dismantled. You'll be the majority shareholder of a bankrupt shell, and you'll likely face criminal charges for failing to disclose these liabilities once you took control. He placed a single sheet of paper on my desk, the Restitution Act. You have until 5 p.m., Elara, the same deadline as your father's resignation. Sign it, and we keep the Whitford name on the building. Refuse, and I burn it all down. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I sat in the dim light of the copy room, the green light of the scanner blinking like a taunt. I looked at the Restitution Act. I looked at the legacy audit. For 28 years, I had been the slow one, the one who didn't see the trap until it snapped. But Silas Thorne made one mistake. He thought I was like my father. He thought I cared about the name on the building. He thought I cared about being rich. I pulled out the mahogany box. I reached under the velvet lining, searching for the very bottom. There, tucked into a hidden compartment I hadn't noticed before, was a small, hand-drawn map of the 1965 Brooklyn office, and a tiny brass key. Grandma Eleanor hadn't just left me the receipts, she had left me the insurance policy. I grabbed my bag and ran for the stairs. I didn't take the elevator, I didn't call a cab. I ran toward the subway, toward the old Brooklyn office that had been boarded up for 30 years. The clock was at 3:15 p.m. I had 90 minutes to find the one thing Silas Thorne didn't know existed, the one thing that would prove that the Thorne-Whitford agreement wasn't a debt, it was a fraud. The subway ride felt like an eternity. The letters on the subway map danced, but I didn't care. I followed the patterns. I followed the architecture of Grandma's secret. I reached the old office, a crumbling brick building in a neighborhood that had long since moved on. The windows were covered in plywood. I found the side door, the one marked with a faint carved E near the hinges. The brass key fit. I stepped into the dust and the dark. The air smelled of old paper and secrets. I found the floorboard Grandma had marked on the map. I pried it up, my fingernails bleeding, until I saw the metal lockbox. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't a contract. It was a photograph. 1969. My grandmother, Eleanor, standing in front of this very building. Beside her was Elias Thorne, and between them was a third person, a man the legacy audit didn't mention, a man named Marcus Sterling, my father's namesake, and in his hand he was holding a canceled check for the full amount of the 1968 debt, signed by Elias Thorne himself. Paid in full, the memo line read. Equity returned. Silas Thorne's father hadn't been a silent partner, he had been a lender, and he had been paid back every cent 50 years ago. The side letter in the audit was a forgery, a fake my father had been too terrified to verify, and Silas had been too greedy to let go. I looked at my watch, 4:45 p.m. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret Coleman. "Margaret," I said, my voice cold and hard as diamond, "I need you to call the police and tell Silas Thorne to meet me in the lobby. I have something he needs to see." The slow daughter was about to finish the architecture of a total collapse. The lobby of Whitford Tower felt like a cathedral of glass and cold intentions. The clock on the wall read 4:58 p.m. Outside, the Manhattan sunset was bleeding a bruised purple across the sky. Silas Thorne was leaning against the security desk, checking his gold watch with the casual arrogance of a man who had already spent the money he was about to steal. He saw me push through the revolving doors, hair disheveled, breath coming in ragged gasps, clutching a dusty metal lockbox to my chest, and he smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey finally stop running. "Cutting it close, Elara," Silas said, stepping forward. He held out a silver fountain pen. "The board is still upstairs. Sign the Restitution Act now, and we can present it as a historical correction. We'll both be heroes. Your father's reputation stays in the grave, and your future stays in the penthouse." I stopped 3 feet from him. I didn't take the pen. I didn't even look at it. "You know, Silas," I said, my voice echoing in the vast empty lobby, "my parents spent 20 years telling me I was slow. They told me I couldn't see the world correctly. But the thing about dyslexia is that when you can't trust the words, you learn to trust the structures. You learn to look for the piece that doesn't fit." Silas's faltered. "What are you talking about? Sign the paper." I went to the Brooklyn office. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes, a tiny architectural crack in his foundation. "I found Grandma's insurance policy. I found the truth about your father." "Your father was the founder's partner," Silas hissed, stepping into my personal space. "He was cheated out of his legacy." "Your father was a predatory lender," I countered, my voice rising. "He tried to leverage a short-term loan into a 40% stake in 1968. But Eleanor was smarter than you, and she was certainly smarter than my father." I opened the lockbox. I didn't pull out the photograph yet. I pulled out the canceled check. "November 12th, 1969, paid in full, signed by Elias Thorne. The equity was returned 60 years ago, Silas. The side letter you've been using to blackmail my father is a forgery. You've been extorting this company for $2 million a year based on a debt that died before I was born." I looked at my watch. 4:45 p.m. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret Coleman. "Margaret," I said, my voice cold and hard as diamond, "I need you to call the police and tell Silas Thorne to meet me in the lobby. I have something he needs to see." The slow daughter was about to finish the architecture of a total collapse. The lobby of Whitford Tower felt like a cathedral of glass and cold intentions. The clock on the wall read 4:58 p.m. Outside, the Manhattan sunset was bleeding a bruised purple across the sky. Silas Thorne was leaning against the security desk, checking his gold watch with the casual arrogance of a man who had already spent the money he was about to steal. He saw me push through the revolving doors, hair disheveled, breath coming in ragged gasps, clutching a dusty metal lockbox to my chest, and he smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey finally stop running. "Cutting it close, Elara," Silas said, stepping forward. He held out a silver fountain pen. "The board is still upstairs. Sign the Restitution Act now, and we can present it as a historical correction. We'll both be heroes. Your father's reputation stays in the grave, and your future stays in the penthouse." I stopped 3 feet from him. I didn't take the pen. I didn't even look at it. "You know, Silas," I said, my voice echoing in the vast empty lobby, "my parents spent 20 years telling me I was slow. They told me I couldn't see the world correctly. But the thing about dyslexia is that when you can't trust the words, you learn to trust the structures. You learn to look for the piece that doesn't fit." Silas's faltered. "What are you talking about? Sign the paper." I went to the Brooklyn office. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes, a tiny architectural crack in his foundation. "I found Grandma's insurance policy. I found the truth about your father." "Your father was the founder's partner," Silas hissed, stepping into my personal space. "He was cheated out of his legacy." "Your father was a predatory lender," I countered, my voice rising. "He tried to leverage a short-term loan into a 40% stake in 1968. But Eleanor was smarter than you, and she was certainly smarter than my father." I opened the lockbox. I didn't pull out the photograph yet. I pulled out the canceled check. November 12th, 1969. Paid in full. Signed by Elias Thorne. The equity was returned 60 years ago, Silas. The side letter you've been using to blackmail my father is a forgery. You've been extorting this company for $2 million a year based on a debt that died before I was born. I looked at my watch. 4:45 p.m. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret Coleman. "Margaret," I said, my voice cold and hard as diamond, "I need you to call the police and tell Silas Thorne to meet me in the lobby. I have something he needs to see." The slow daughter was about to finish the architecture of a total collapse. The lobby of Whitford Tower felt like a cathedral of glass and cold intentions. The clock on the wall read 4:58 p.m. Outside, the Manhattan sunset was bleeding a bruised purple across the sky. Silas Thorne was leaning against the security desk, checking his gold watch with the casual arrogance of a man who had already spent the money he was about to steal. He saw me push through the revolving doors, hair disheveled, breath coming in ragged gasps, clutching a dusty metal lockbox to my chest, and he smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey finally stop running. "Cutting it close, Elara," Silas said, stepping forward. He held out a silver fountain pen. "The board is still upstairs. Sign the Restitution Act now and we can present it as a historical correction. We'll both be heroes. Your father's reputation stays in the grave and your future stays in the penthouse." I stopped 3 feet from him. I didn't take the pen. I didn't even look at it. "You know, Silas," I said, my voice echoing in the vast empty lobby, "my parents spent 20 years telling me I was slow. They told me I couldn't see the world correctly. But the thing about dyslexia is that when you can't trust the words, you learn to trust the structures. You learn to look for the piece that doesn't fit." Silas's falter faltered. "What are you talking about? Sign the paper." I went to the Brooklyn office. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes, a tiny architectural crack in his foundation. "I found Grandma's insurance policy. I found the truth about your father." "Your father was the founder's partner," Silas hissed, stepping into my personal space. "He was cheated out of his legacy." "Your father was a predatory lender," I countered, my voice rising. "He tried to leverage a short-term loan into a 40% stake in 1968, but Eleanor was smarter than you, and she was certainly smarter than my father." I opened the lockbox. I didn't pull out the photograph yet. I pulled out the canceled check. November 12th, 1969. Paid in full. Signed by Elias Thorne. The equity was returned 60 years ago, Silas. The side letter you've been using to blackmail my father is a forgery.